full of things that make my former scrapbooker's heart go pitter-patter. It's podcast day. It's podcast day. Hi, I'm Mars. Welcome to the heyBrownBerry Knitting Podcast. That's my daughter. One of them.
Hi.
That's Adachi. Another knitter in this house. And that's my other daughter, Mizi.
Hi.
My girls are getting ready to head out and do teenager things, so I'll be able to record this podcast and spend a little time visiting with you. Thanks for being here. Thank you for being here. As I said, my name is Mars. You can find me on Instagram and Ravelry as heyBrownBerry. This is a making podcast, and I've been away from YouTube for a little while, so I'm happy to be back and recording. I was really considering today whether or not it was a good podcast recording day. Those of you who create podcasts and have a YouTube channel or an audio podcast might understand this a bit. It's difficult sometimes to just publish some content and connect with our virtual community right in the moment when we want to. And I was thinking about podcasting for the last several days, but I was held back by feeling like it had to be the right time. I needed the right lighting. I had to have all of the items I wanted to share with you lined up and ready to go. And that was really holding me back. And I decided, you know what? It's an overcast day. The lighting is going to be changing a bit. I have a comfortable space and a quiet house and things to share. And so I decided that that's enough of a reason to hit record. And whenever you're watching this, I hope that it's a time where you've just decided to take a few minutes and do something you like to do. And since you've decided that part of that is sharing your time with me, we're going to dive right in. This is a making podcast, and I call it that because I'm primarily a knitter when it comes to craft and creating, but I do dabble in other creative outlets, so I'm going to share a few of them with you. On the knitting front, I have works in progress to share with you, as well as some stash appreciation and some yarn dyeing, things that will eventually be knit that I'd love to show you. So we'll start with that. For works in progress, while we are chatting, I'm going to be working on a project it is the Ranger Cowl. Let me just say right now that this recording is being done on a device where I don't have sophisticated editing software. So there won't be much in the way of editing, meaning captions and links and pictures and so on. Again, that was one of the things that was holding me back from creating this episode. So I'm just letting you know ahead of time that any information that I mentioned that I think you may want to learn more about, I will gladly put in the description box below this video here on YouTube. And of course, you can always comment and ask questions or find me on Instagram or Ravelry if there's something that you'd like more information about. I'm happy to provide that. Total tangent. Normally, I would fall into a routine of apologizing for not being here sooner, apologizing for changing up my setting and my equipment. And I've been reading a lot lately about the language we use with ourselves, and I'm sorry is something that I definitely overuse. Not because I think apologies are bad, but I think apologizing for things that don't require them, it tends to be pretty pervasive. I don't want to generalize and say amongst certain groups, so I'll speak for myself. I'm happy that you're here. I'm very grateful that you came to find me or came back to find me, and that's all that matters. So I am finishing up a row on a project that I want to show you. I decided that it would be a good one to start with, as it's my largest work well, that's not really true, but it's my largest work in progress that I hope to finish very soon. It is the Ranger Cowl. It is a combination cowl / hood, and the designer is Michael Lodeman. I may be mispronouncing his last name, but he is MVLOEDMAN on Instagram. I think that's right. Anyway, I'll make sure that Michael's information is below the video. I discovered him thanks to my friend Natalie of RembrancesPottery. I think we were down the rabbit hole looking at patterns together via Instagram, which is so much fun to do virtually with a fiber friend. And she saw this, it was modeled as a hood, but the pattern calls it a cowl. And she saw this design and shared it with me, and I was immediately smitten. It was exactly the kind of thing we had been talking about, a cooler weather accessory that was versatile and made in a heavier weight yarn. So I'm going to show you my progress on it so far. I'm going to hold it up until the color comes through a little better. I'm stretching all the way up. I have shared this project in progress on my Instagram feed over at heyBrownBerry. I am in love with this design. The way it works is you knit this long panel, the body of the cowl, and then ultimately it's going to be seamed together to form a loop to go around my neck. And this ribbed textured portion can also be used as a hood. I wasn't planning on modeling it, could you tell? So it's almost done. So this is what it will look like. I'm cozy in it already. It's a brilliant design with very simple stitches. It's a paid for pattern, so I won't give too much away, but this texture is a special kind of ribbing. You've got a stockinette panel, and then this gorgeous cable. There's some great shaping that helps it turn easily from that hood method of wearing it to putting it around your shoulders as a cowl. So I am in the home stretch with this project. I'm making it out of Briggs & Little. It's their heritage yarn, which is considered an Aran weight. I think it is an Aran weight in my experience. This is about Aran. It is heavier than a traditional worsted. And this beautiful rose color was chosen for me by my friend Kelly. Hi, Kelly. She got this for me in New Brunswick and gave it to me the first time that we met in person. I tried using this yarn for a sweater project before now, and two things caused me to pull that project out. One was that my gauge was making it really stiff, and the pattern I had chosen was meant to be something drapey. And I didn't really like the fabric as it was, and I wasn't comfortable enough trying to modify the gauge in a way that would make it looser. I just had to acknowledge that it was the wrong yarn for that pattern. And I was also at the time knitting very differently than I am now. I've recently switched from being a 100% continental knitter, which means I would carry my yarn in my left hand and tension it in my left hand, and then ultimately pick stitches using my right hand and the right needle. So maybe I can show you here. You'll be seeing the back of my hands, but you'll get the gist. So I would tension the yarn, with my left hand, mostly using my index finger to hold the yarn taut. And I would pick stitches. This is a pretty typical continental style, although some people do hold their finger a lot closer to the needle that's holding the stitches. So I loved continental knitting, especially for ribbing, because I can purl very quickly. So anytime I have something like this, where I'm knitting and purling stitches one right after the other, like a ribbing or a seed stitch, it was very easy for me to do with continental knitting. But I switched recently to, I believe it's English style, which reverses most of that process. And so I tension my yarn now in my right hand. I made this switch because with that sweater I mentioned as an example, I was having gauge issues very often. Eli of Skeindeer Knits has some very good podcast content about gauge and being on gauge or off gauge or having the correct gauge. And after having listened to her talk about treating your individual project and the fabric that you create with a certain needle size and yarn as something that is right for you and right when you know it's right when you see it, I really thought about how I could improve upon my knitting gauge and the fabric I create. And I always noticed that when I knit continental, my stitching was very loose. It was fast, don't get me wrong. I could fly through ribbing, stockinette, anything. But my gauge in comparison to what a pattern might offer, or the fabric that I would have in comparison to the fabric I was trying to achieve, was not quite right unless I did a lot of adjustments, sometimes having to go down 2 or 3 needle sizes. So knitting on much smaller needles in order to achieve the right kind of knit fabric. So I thought I could go back to the way I learned to knit, which is tensioning with my right hand, and see if that would help my gauge, because most often when I would try with my right hand, my stitches were not only tighter, but they were more neat. They just looked more tidy. And so it was a struggle at first to go back to using my right hand. I actually used to have trouble with my shoulder because I was doing a lot of extra arm and wrist movement when I first learned to knit. But I watched Mina, who is the knitting expat here on YouTube, and I believe on Instagram as well. She showed her knitting style. She's a very fast knitter, but she showed in a slowed down version in one of her bonus videos how she tensions her yarn with her right hand and flicks the yarn around the needle in order to create new stitches. So I'll go very slow. What I'm doing is, for a knit stitch, for example, I'm putting the needles together and I just use my index finger to flick the yarn around the tip of the needle and create that new stitch. And in this way, I keep my working yarn a lot closer to the needle. I keep my stitches a lot closer to the tips of the needle, and I use much less wrist and shoulder movement. And that's really made a difference for me in coming back to this method of knitting. Now what I have to work on is keeping my shoulders down and relaxed. Do you ever find yourself working on a project and before you know it, your stitches are up under your nose and your shoulders are creeping up to your ears? I remind myself often during my time sitting and knitting that I need to relax and use knitting as the oasis that it's meant to be. So I'm loving this project because there's so many repetitive stitches that I really can enjoy each row and not feel pressure to read a chart or to remember a stitch sequence. It's a very well written pattern and I highly recommend it. I'll make sure you have the details in the description box. I think I'll be finished with this project this week, so I'll be happy to turn it into a finished object. The weather is barely cooling down here in Florida, in the southeastern US where I live. If you've been here before, you know that I will wear wool just about any time that I can. And Florida is, in general, an over air-conditioned state. So more than likely, I often end up in a place where the air condition is blasting and I'm freezing. I love having my woolly wear. I'm also planning to go to Edinburgh Yarn Festival next year. Are any of you going to be there? Next March, I'm planning to return to Edinburgh, Scotland, and visit with all my knitty friends and replenish all the yarn I'm using from my stash. As part of the plans for that trip, I've joined a podcaster named Lee. Hi, Lee. Lee has the Luli podcast out here on YouTube, and she is Luli on Instagram as well. And she is creating a really welcome group through her Ravelry group and through using the hashtag on Instagram, knit1000grams. I'll put that below. Knit 1000 grams is basically a stash down. It's a knit along which runs, well, it started on September 1st and it runs through the dates for Edinburgh Yarn Festival next year, which I believe are March 19th through the 21st. I think that's right. If you go to edinyarnfest.org, you can find details on the festival. I'll include that link as well in case I've messed that up, and if so, apologies. Oops, there I go saying sorry again. I'm grateful for the opportunity to go to Edinburgh again, so I would love to see some of you there. And in order to facilitate that, I'm going to make sure I link them properly below. So Knit 1000 grams is a great way to use up some of my stash. If I can knit according to my goal, which I've actually set at 2000 grams, I should have some room in my stash for more new yarn. And next year when I attend the festival, I'm also planning on buying some spinning fiber. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. So my second whip actually touches on a couple of things, and I'm keeping it here in this bag that was made for me by my friend Nancy Henry on Instagram. I've got some cute pins on here, and I'm just going to shamelessly plug my brand that I co-own with Kelly of the Celtic Cast On podcast, which is called Maker's Merch. Our shop information is below, but here is one of the products we are super proud of. This is a maker pin. Let me make sure you can see that. We call it our maker ribbon pin, and it comes in teal and peach. And it's an enamel pin that you can either put on your project bag or on your favorite top, or if you have a pennant that you hang up where you collect your enamel pins, it's perfect for that. So inside this bag, I am holding a couple of socks, part of a pair. That's handy. The person I'm making these for has blessedly small feet. I won't say who they're for, but they are a gift, and they're made with some very special yarn. This yarn in the main foot and leg area is eco-printed yarn that came in the form of a sock blank, which was eco-printed, meaning printed with plants and natural dyes, by Maria of the Ninja Chickens podcast. I have been wanting to use these two yarns together for a long time. You can see that there are some differences between the two, but I know the recipient won't mind that. Within the sock blank, there were different leaves and stems and different dye that make for really cool striping and speckling. Maria has excellent techniques for combining plants on sock blanks and silks so that you get all this lovely color play. And you can see that there's a bit of yellow and orange, a little bit of cream amidst the purple, which led me to using this contrast color, which is naturally dyed by my daughter and I. We have a yarn dyeing business called Dyenamixx Yarns. I'll link our Etsy shop below because we have a special update coming in October. This particular yarn is a superwash merino nylon with a bit of stellina. It's hard to see the sparkle on camera, but there's just enough shimmer in it to keep it interesting. So I decided to use it as the contrast color because I think it goes really well with some of the speckles inside the sock blank. They look a little strange, right? I'm actually going to do an afterthought heel on these socks. An afterthought heel is one that is put into the sock after you have finished the remaining pieces of the sock. If you're not familiar, take a look here on YouTube by searching afterthought heel. There's actually an excellent tutorial by Rachel of Treehouse Knits on my Ravelry page for this project. I will link, I think I already have linked to Rachel's tutorial. Essentially, you cut a row of stitches, which makes an opening in one side of the sock, and then you knit a wedge, very similar to this toe, into that opening, and that creates the heel. And you put that in at the point that is just maybe 1.5 to 2 inches shy of the person's foot length. So once the heel is in, then the whole foot of the sock will fit them nicely. And I was just humming along, knitting with this, and because I was enjoying it so much, I decided I'll worry about the heel after. It's an afterthought. That's my other most active whip right now. I intend to put in the heels for that this week using the contrasting yarn. You can see the stellina a little bit there. I'll hold it back here so there's not so much glare. So the heels will be in this color in order to match the cuff and toe. I'm having a lot of fun with that. I tend to get on sock binges at times, but right now that's the only pair of socks that I really have on the go. My next work in progress is crochet. As this is a making podcast, you're going to see all sorts of goodies here today. Right behind me, you'll see draped over our couch, my granny square, nope, that's wrong, granny stripe crochet blanket. It lives here on this couch in our family room. I gifted it to my husband as an anniversary present after I finished it at the end of last year, and we use it pretty regularly. Contrary to popular belief, it's not always sweltering inside the house. Sometimes we like to stream something on Netflix and snuggle up under this blanket. My girls use it. It's all superwash yarns that I collected and was gifted, so it's washable. I actually just washed it the other day. Threw it in the washing machine and the dryer with no problems. So it's been through its first wash test. Because I enjoyed that project so much as a long-term work in progress, last summer when I was visiting Maria in North Carolina, I cast it on what I call my Carolina Craftcation blanket. And this is another crochet granny stripes blanket. I'll link the pattern information below. But this one is done in DK and worsted weight yarns, and they're all non-superwash yarns, what I like to call the woolly wools. Although there is some alpaca and some other blends in here. I won't be able to show you all of it, I don't think, without standing up, but you can see it's growing. It's gaining on me. Hello. This is one of those projects that's functional while you're working on it. So as the weather starts cooling down this autumn, I lay it across my lap and I work row by row. Sometimes I'll only do 1 or 2 rows at a time, which is perfect for a little break from knitting. Random podcast moment. It's my husband there. He knows I'm recording, but he had to get some water, and who am I to deny him that, right? So we'll just carry on. The best thing I can say about this blanket is I hope you have a project like it. It is a comfort crochet. It is a snack project. It's an in-between palette cleanser. It plays so many functions in my making. And the yarn within this blanket has come from all over the world, literally. Scotland, Australia, different parts of the US, through gifts and purchases and deep stash diving. So I'm really enjoying it. Lucy of Attic 24 has completely shifted my love of crochet. She has some excellent patterns, and this one is my second go round, but it feels completely different because of the yarn weight and the yarn textures being non-superwash, more toothy fibers, which I love. That was the intention. So I work on this every now and then to sometimes just to ease my brain because I already know the stitch pattern. So I hope for you that you have something like that too. And if you do, you can tell me about it below. I love hearing from you. So if you've got a snack pattern that you work on, or a comfort knit or a comfort crochet project, share it with us. I'd love to hear about it. Sticking with the theme of all things yarny, I've got some needle adjacent projects. Needle adjacent is a phrase that I borrow from Chanel. They are Piper Nell on Instagram. Needle adjacent projects are those that are next to the needles, near the needles, soon to be on the needles. And my needle adjacent project at the moment is a cardigan. I've been wanting another sweater knit on the needles, and I was determined to make that sweater from stash. The only issue is that I don't have a good number of sweater quantities of yarn in stash, especially in non-superwash wool. For me, a sweater quantity is somewhere between 1,000 to 1,500 yards of, say, a fingering weight yarn. And I have that quantity in complementary colors that I can use, but any of my sweater quantities that are all the same color, all the same yarn, are heavier weight, DK and worsted. So I was looking for an everyday type cardigan and something that would just be cozy. So not too much embellishment, no cables or anything like that. And when I was at the Edinburgh Yarn Festival last year, pardon me 1 second, I have an escaped needle with pointy ends. And when you're sitting in the couch and there's lots of things around you, guaranteed this will end up somewhere it shouldn't. I'm going to go ahead and put that in the project bag. So when I was at Edinburgh Yarn Festival last year, I had the pleasure of shopping with Isolde. Isolde had a beautiful setup at the marketplace, kind of her own shop area, very cozy, sort of off to one side. And I walked in there and had to really hold tight to my wallet. so I could, be sensible. But she has just about everything you can think of in there, and it was a really pleasant shopping experience. I commend her on following her passion. I picked this cardigan pattern, Wardy. I hope I'm saying that right. Wardy is a deep V-neck button-down cardigan with pockets, as you can see, modeled beautifully here by Isolde. And this fit the bill in terms of shape. It calls for a heavy fingering to sport weight yarn, and it is knit in pieces and seamed, which is great. I actually like that method of construction for sweaters. And especially something that I would consider an everyday sweater. I wanted something that was going to hold up well. That was another reason that I wanted to do it in a non-superwash wool, is I wanted something that had a lot of strength and structure to it, wouldn't stretch out too much. So I'm just going to, because it's a paid for pattern, I'm just going to show you another view of it here. Look at the split hem. We're saying yes to that. I love everything about this, including the yarn that is used in the pattern itself. It's a beautiful yarn. It's actually, let's see, it's Rauma Finalgarn, and that's 100% Norwegian wool. I picked up some of that at Edinburgh as well. It's a gorgeous yarn, and it would make a perfect sweater. I have what I feel is something very close to that in mind for this cardigan. My daughter Adachi and I have been doing quite a bit of natural dyeing lately. And while I was in Edinburgh, Emily brought me, I kind of pre-ordered from her, this North Ronaldsay wool. Let me show you the label first. It's a yarn from North Ronaldsay. I've got all kinds of writing on there to remind myself what we used to dye this yarn. Adachi and I are exploring natural dyeing using only things that we either bring into the house as food, like avocados, pomegranates, onions, or that we have in our yard already. We've got ferns and loquat, pine needles and pine cones, acorns, oak galls, or things that we are gifted and sent by lovely maker friends, which has given us things like tansy and madder root. Beautiful, beautiful natural materials for dyeing. This North Ronaldsay wool was a pale cream color. I actually have some of it in my blanket. Let me show you. The original wool was this color. Just a pale cream, kind of standard natural color. And we dyed it a few different ways because it took to the dye very well, the natural dye. This one, for example, my label says this was dyed with 1 cup of coffee grounds. We used alum sulfate as a mordant, and this was done as a simmer, what we call like a kettle dye. It'd sit in a hot dye bath for some time. I'm gonna move this around a bit till we can get a better representation of the color. Let's see. That's pretty good. It's a yellowish brown. We also used avocado pits and peels on this wool. And that gives this peach pink color. You can see that here. It has a little bit of a hint of yellow, and that was just the difference in time spent in the dye pot. And we actually simmered this twice and let it sit for a while overnight. Now the dye bath was what I call a second dip. So we had already done some dyeing in the avocado dye bath, and then this was a second dip. So you'll notice it's a pretty faint color. And then the third skein, we did some little testers as well, but the third skein was dyed with loquat leaf. Loquat is also known as Japanese plum, and we have a loquat tree growing in our backyard. That's about right. It's going a bit yellow as the sun moves around outside. No complaints about it being a sunny day. So loquat leaves give a pale rose pink color, almost going towards brown. So I pulled these out of my stash because, as with most natural dyes, the colors go really nicely together. And I'm considering using them for this cardigan. So it's going to be a color block cardigan. I'm very tempted to do it striped. My friend Natalie suggested just stripe it all the way, which I think would be really cool. But I don't know that I'll have the patience for it because I would like to have this cardigan done in time for the NotRhinbeck Festival. This is going to be my Not at Rhinebeck Festival sweater. It's causing the light to go crazy. Not at Rhinebeck is a virtual festival that I am participating in with a bunch of other amazing makers. And the best way for you to see what's happening is to go on Instagram and use the hashtag NotRhinbeck2018. This is meant to be a virtual festival that we can all participate in globally. Rhinebeck is the slang name for the New York Sheep and Wool Festival that happens this October. And not everyone can make it to New York to attend that festival. It's one that's well known by knitters around the world and well attended, but not everyone can get there. So my friend Natalie came up with this genius idea to have a group of vendors from across different parts of our making community get together and virtually put on a festival for those who can't be in New York in person. So myself and a lot of other makers that I know you'll love are participating by way of shop specials and updates that will take place on the same weekend as Rhinebeck. And if you follow the hashtag and follow those makers, you'll get all the information you need about it. In keeping with the Rhinebeck sweater tradition, we are also having a Not Rhinebeck sweater knit along. And Wardy will be my sweater for that. Laura of the Tiny Human Knits podcast is hosting a Ravelry thread for chatter and for finished objects in her Ravelry group. And I'll make sure I link to that for you as well. So wish me luck on figuring out how to color block this beautiful pattern. I haven't decided if I'm going to go dark to light or light to dark or stripes or adding another color. I haven't quite decided. So I'm going to swatch the S word. I'm going to swatch and see which color looks better up near my face versus down near my not face. I hope you'll join us for the virtual festival for Not Rhinebeck, and I would love it if you would cast on and knit a sweater for the Not Rhinebeck sweater cowl. Even if you don't finish by the start of the festival weekend, which is October 19th, there's so much good chatter and encouragement going on in the Ravelry group. I think you'll love it. Very quickly, I'm going to mention that both of my passion projects, Makers Merch and Dyenamixx Yarns, we're all going to be vendors at the Not Rhinebeck Virtual Festival. In my next episode, I'm going to show you one of the beautiful project bags we'll have from Makers Merch. We'll also have our best-selling pin, the Knitravert pin. This one has been super popular. And our maker pin, which I showed you earlier. And the sling tote, a beautiful, beautiful project bag, which I'm going to feature in the next episode. With Dyenamixx Yarns, we're going to have mini skein sets. The mini skein sets will feature these natural dye colors as well as several others. Yeah, I'll be patient with the light so you can see these a little bit better. Some coordinating mini skein sets, beautiful colors, all meant to go together in project of your choice. Socks, sweaters, color work, accessories, gifts. These mini skein sets will come 5 to a pack, 20 grams each. 100 grams of naturally dyed yarn, and there will be information included in each set about what natural products were used to dye that yarn. So follow Makers Merch and Dyenamixx on Instagram to get more information about what we'll be offering at the NotRhinbeck Festival. Let's chat fabric. First of all, do you like my scarf? This is one of my favorite new accessories. This is a silk scarf, and I'm wearing it as a hair accessory, but I also love wearing it as a neck accessory. I cover my head with it like a hood because it's so soft, and it was made for me by Maria of Ninja Chickens, and it is botanically printed. She's used different plants to print these gorgeous patterns on this scarf. I'm starting myself a nice little collection of Maria's printed silks. She has small, medium, and large size silks in her shop updates. So be sure to follow her online. It's just such a simple thing as far as an accessory goes, but the work that goes into it, the fact that it's plant infused, soft colors that go with everything, makes it extra special. And she used some Australian pine, which grows here local to me, that I sent her, and she printed with that pine on this scarf, which I think is a beautiful way for us to be connected. Thank you, Maria. I love it. Yeah, let's talk some more fabric. Some of my friends and I chat about sewing and quilting sometimes. I don't sew very much. I've never made a quilt on my own. I helped my mom stitch up parts of a quilt once. So my quilt cred is not high. But I would love to do more sewing. I always say that. I have 2/3 of a beautiful sewing journey. I have the desire, and I have all the tools and fabric. So I'm just missing the skill, really, and the practice. And I'm sure you're thinking, that's an important third, Mars. I know. So I encourage myself to try little bits at a time, hemming things, mending, easing my way in. The other day, I did some retail therapy style shopping, meaning I did not need this fabric, but I needed this fabric. You know what I mean? I went and found some duck canvas. If you're familiar with fabric, you'll know that this is a heavyweight canvas fabric in these colors. Ooh. A deep navy blue, a merlot. Let's see, here's the navy. A merlot red. Red is my favorite color, so I had to get this one. And this mustard. I actually love how they look next to each other. So I got this duck canvas with the intent of sewing some project bags, as well as making some notebook covers, and just trying some other creative fabric play. Doing things like woolly tattoos, using wool as embroidery thread, and using my moderate skill of drawing to create my own embroidery pattern template, and then using some wool to embroider on this canvas. It's very hard wearing, so I actually have some special needles that can go through this thickness. And I'm just going to be open to other things that I can do. I've actually been watching some sewing videos. YouTube is amazing for learning. Thank you to all of you out there who link to content and put out content, especially tutorials, tips and tricks. We appreciate you. I love that I can go onto YouTube and put in things like duck canvas tote and watch a video from start to finish of how to use these materials and make something specific, which is what I did. I actually watched back to back quite a few videos on sewing just to get in the mindset and start feeling more comfortable. And I found that after a few videos, it didn't seem so scary. So I look forward to spending some time with this. I bought a good amount of each color to give myself options. So friends, I'm wrapping up here soon. The last thing I wanted to talk to you, second to last, being candid, the second to last thing I want to talk to you about is a couple of books. I've joined a book, I'll call it a virtual book group on Goodreads. If you are on Goodreads, I'm over there as Mama Mars. I'll link that below. Goodreads is an online site that features a lot of books and authors, but it's sort of like what Ravelry is to knitters and crocheters and spinners. It is an online community-centered site, and it allows you to track books that you have read, that you're currently reading, that you'd like to read. You can set goals for how many books you'd like to read. You can read reviews from other folks. They have author discussions, book lists. There's a great blog over there, and it's goodreads.com. You can sign up for it. It's free. And we have a bookish knitters group over there, started by Louise, who is Louise Tilbrook Designs on Instagram. And it started with a post from Louise saying essentially, you know, I think there are a lot of knitters out there who are also fans of reading, all kinds of reading. And the hashtag bookish knitters was born, and the group on Goodreads was born. And there are over 100 folks in the group now, and it's a great discussion group. We have different threads going that are both knitting and reading related. One of the things Louise did to start the conversation in that Goodreads group was to have us talk about our September reads. I'm recording this on September 30th, so the month is just about to end. And she encouraged us to choose a book or books for September that we wanted to read, which was great. I actually got some books finished this month that had been languishing for no good reason. And just having that little nudge and a group to discuss with, I got those books finished. And I started another one, which will definitely bleed over into October. This book is called The Robber Bride by Margaret Atwood. See, I have my Lamplight Books bookmark from a visit to Seattle, which makes me want to say hi to my friend Jess and Amy and other Seattle friends, other Washington State friends, Karen. Hi, everybody out there on the West Coast. I have a bookmark in here to show you that I'm not very far into the book. But Margaret Atwood is the author of The Handmaid's Tale, a book that I thoroughly enjoyed. And I actually recently watched the series on television. Well, I watched the series on a DVD from my library because I'm always late to the party. So it had already been out and we watched the first and second season on DVD. But I enjoyed Margaret Atwood's writing style in The Handmaid's Tale, so I got this book at our library sale for 25 cents. And I'm going to read The Robber Bride this month. It's a bit slow going. It's starting off as kind of a fantasy book that isn't blatantly fantasy. So it's, you know, people going through real life situations, but there are references to things that seem a bit supernatural, a bit mythical. So because I haven't gotten very far, I don't have a review for you yet. I mainly wanted to show you this so I could tell you about Bookish Knitters on Goodreads and the Bookish Knitters hashtag on Instagram in case you want to join us. There's lots of good discussion out there, and I've already increased my want to read list by quite a lot. And the second book, I just wanted to give you a peek at this one, is called A Flow Book, which just arrived in a beautiful care package the other day from Maria. This is a book that takes its time, an unhurried adventure in creative mindfulness. I could go on for an hour about how timely this book is. And Maria knows that, and I love her for that. This book, when I tell you it is chock full of things that make my former scrapbooker's heart go pitter-patter, it is incredible. its focus, as it says, is about slowing down and about being mindful and about how to allow that mindfulness to make space for our creative energy. And it's got some gentle, instructive content, but it also has these whimsical things in it. Whoops. So chock full of things are falling out. Like these beautiful moments cards. These are perforated, and you write a beautiful moment, whatever you want, and the intent is for you to tear those out and stick them in a jar so you can read them back to yourself at any time. Whether you're feeling up or feeling down, you can just reach into your jar and remember a beautiful moment. I will share with you a line from a book that I read this weekend called The Alchemist that really struck me. And listening to it as an audiobook, it was a beautiful moment for me because it reminded me that I was giving myself time to just enjoy the words and the language that the author was sharing. So I wrote a quote: "When you want something, all the universe conspires to help you achieve it." That was repeated throughout the book, The Alchemist. I highly recommend it, by the way. But that was a beautiful moment for me because up to now, I haven't been able to take a lot of time to just read and relax. So I wanted to remember that at another time. Tons of other things in here, including a 30-day mindfulness notebook. So there's lots of things tucked into it. This is such a gorgeous, gorgeous gift. It's just full of poetry and pictures and spaces to write and prompts and cues, stickers. Sometimes when we talk about being mindful, it's difficult to figure out where to start. And so to have things like a pocket envelope of cards to use to write thoughts and insights while reading the book or otherwise, and they're just beautifully colored. It's absolutely perfect. For many of us, gift giving season is coming up, and if there's someone in your life that could use a reminder about slowing down and taking care of themselves, this would be a great gift. A book that takes its time. That segues right into my very last topic, and I'll only spend a couple of minutes on it. This is sort of a what's on my mind type thing. I create this podcast because of connection. I love connecting with you. I love the connection it has brought me to people who I may never meet in real life, and yet I feel very close to them, and they show me great kindness. And that connection has really carried me through some difficult times recently, and the availability of a virtual community that sometimes becomes a real life community when I'm lucky has been life-saving. Not to be melodramatic, but I know that for many of you like me, our making is a connection to things that we value, and it shores us up when we need it. So just sharing with you what's on my mind, I've been thinking about this week: connection versus comparison. You'll find through my Instagram post and here I love alliteration. I like words that start with the same letter and sound. So connection and comparison is kind of my thought for the week, something I'm untangling in my mind. So I'll drop a few nuggets, and if you have thoughts to offer, feel free. Connection versus comparison for me comes up quite often, especially with social media. Instagram is the example that comes right to the forefront of my mind. Many times I go on Instagram because I am looking for connection. The way my account is set up at heyBrownBerry, a lot of what's in my feed comes from other makers, other people who are creative, people in the arts, people who express themselves creatively in one way or another. And so I feel connected to what they're doing, whether it's the same craft that I'm involved in or not. There are ties there. But sometimes I feel a strong sense of comparison, and this is self-inflicted, I will look at beautiful photos and wish my photos looked nicer. I will see finished projects and berate myself for not having finished anything in a while. Or even see yarns that are dyed or yarns available for sale and compare that to the yarn that I have available to me here. And that comparison is not a good feeling. It often is the reason why I will stop scrolling on Instagram and just close the app. Because connection is positive and uplifting. Comparison for me is, it's a downer. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts around that. It definitely requires some explicit balance. And I even took a week where I just didn't go on Instagram at all. And I felt refreshed by that. I was really excited to go back and comment and interact with people and connect. So sometimes that's just what it takes is a breather. But the comparison side of it is worth examining for me. And so that's why I bring it up here, because maybe you feel that way too. I have to acknowledge that the comparison is something I'm doing. I know that most people out on Instagram are not putting content out there so that I will compare and feel less than. They are doing it for the sake of connection. I believe that most people are doing that in a good and positive way. So it's just something that's on my mind. And if it's on your mind too, I'd love to hear about it. That's all I have to share for you in this episode. I hope to be back in front of the camera soon so we can talk more about what's happening on and off my needles. Comment down below anything you'd like, any questions. If I missed something in the show notes, don't hesitate to let me know. I will provide links where I can. Otherwise, you can find me out on Instagram or Ravelry. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself, and I'll see you soon. Bye.